I've got a very unusual dance background in that I didn't do ballet, I did contemporary dance, and I started making work when I was about 16, and I couldn't get to do, I did a really weird combination of things for my final year of school and made an art folio with a dance piece in it, which nobody did in 1979. So I had to work out, and then tried to work out, okay, so how do I go on? Do I go to art school? Do I do architecture? I couldn't go to dance school because none of the colleges would take me because I didn't have ballet. So I got into art school and didn't take the place, and then went to Melbourne Uni and did academic stuff, which was actually really good. It gave me a bit of a space to think about how to do everything, and then started working by myself a bit, and then working with my mother's company, and then spending a lot of time just working by myself. A couple of people were incredibly influential on that. A woman called Dana Wrights, who's an American dancer and choreographer who has a long established solo practice. My mother actually brought her out to Australia. So I remember talking to her and realising that it was actually a possible thing to do it that way. You didn't have to be in a company. And I wasn't really a company dancer. I didn't function or think that way. And, my dancing, the things I was interested in dancing weren't the same, and I was interested in making work. So yeah, and also had lots of friends who were visual artists, and I looked at their practice and their studio practice, and I realised that I could try to use that as a sort of a template for how I could work. And I had the possibility of studio space because my mother had a studio, so it meant I could have pretty good access to studio space, which was an incredible privilege. I work in a whole lot of different ways simultaneously, and I find that the most useful way. And I try, especially in the beginning of a working situation, not to try and make everything connect or make sense, but I write a lot, and I work in the studio a lot by myself. Sometimes, depending on the work, I'll muck around a lot by myself, or I'll muck around with other people, either moving myself or not, only observing, depending on the work. But I'm always writing a lot, I read a lot, and very eclectically. And it's like that thing, once you say, you get yourself a blue pen, and then suddenly you notice all the blue pens in the world around you, and so it's things become heightened, I guess, and you start noticing a whole lot of things that maybe have been there all the time, but they start becoming more fascinating for you. I'm not a formal maker. I don't think about things in a very formal or programmatic way. I sometimes attempt to start that way and then realise it's not really the way I think. But I really tried to create this formal square structure because it's something that I play with a lot in terms of the drawings I make and the way I begin thinking about something, but I actually wanted to make a spatial formality to this piece that goes in a square around this room, amongst other things. And I also wanted to distort my body, the body shape. And I wanted that distortion to be present as part of the performance too. And that was also a sort of a historical nod to a performance I'd seen as a teenager at the Adelaide Festival by an artist who was around in the 70s. And then I actually looked her up more recently to see what had happened to her. She no longer makes work, she does something, she went sort of on a kind of another path with her movement work. And her name was Lascia, and she did this performance outside in one of the forecourts of the Adelaide arts centre, and part of the performance was her taking off and putting on her sports shoes and socks. And I remember having a huge argument with my father about it, where he thought it was really silly, and I thought it was great. So the movement material I started mucking around with. I'm not sure how I originally derived it, but in terms of actually organising it, it has sort of some quite complex systems. But again, no matter how often I try to work really formally, I never stick to it because I actually don't find it very interesting. But it keeps on looping on itself. And resetting itself spatially and resetting itself in terms of time. And it was also really important in terms of where the audience might be and how spatially it sat in a particular place, altering the type of relationship that the audience might have to me. So it kept on flipping around between being maybe more in terms of pattern recognition, basically, or to do with of the sort of the more materiality of seeing a person moving and sort of being able to sort of flip between those things, which is a reasonably traditional kind of without making it binary, but sort of a relational thing that happens in dance. And I think some of the material I was also doing was very clearly about trying to find other physical pathways and making different sorts of connections, physical connections too. So when you're working in the studio, there's all these kind of very familiar gestural stuff that happens. So I guess one of my things also, in working in solo material is to find ways to recognise them and then also to play with them and to try and find other ways of making decisions in other ways. And there's so many ways of doing that, I guess, yeah. When I was younger, I felt I had to stake my ground very specifically about being a young female dancer, choreographer by myself on stage. And it was very much to do with trying to be in, very simply in reversing the gaze, and taking some authority over the gaze and trying to work out how to do that in the clearest way. It was about reversing the gaze and making it clear that I wasn't necessarily going to tell you the truth either. Because there's this real assumption that you're exposing yourself in all ways. And I felt that was a really important position to make very clear in my 20s. And I guess that's been like this baseline through all my work. It's probably so embedded now that I don't feel like I don't even think about it, basically, but it's there, like it's really there. So that would be the shift, I guess, just that when I was younger, I really felt like I needed to establish that in my own terms. And that was kind of, when I was first was sort of late 70s, early 80s, and it was done by many people in lots of different ways, and I just felt like I needed to do it the way, within the kind of the existing palette of sort of political and cultural possibilities at that time. I just felt I needed to work out how I situated myself in that area. And that's also shifted. I'm not saying in one particular direction in the future. I think it's just changed. So it still needs to be said too.